I can't believe I have to make a video on this. But it's just inevitable at this point. I'm sure you guys have heard of the mass shooting on 3 Asian spas in America where 8 people died and 7 of them were women and 6 of them were Asian women. I'm absolutely horrified by the way that it was portrayed by both the media and the police. It's really been sparking a conversation among not only the Asian community in America but the Asian community everywhere, especially in Western countries where we have always been seen as outsiders and foreigners. I'm appalled by the fact that media outlets won't call the mass shooting for what it is, and frankly the fact is that mass shooting was a hate crime against Asians and it was not a sex addiction or the mass shooter having a bad day or that he was fed up and he reached a breaking point, which is what the police have stated. It's none of those things, and frankly I do not think that he should be given the benefit of the doubt of having a bad day and therefore he felt it necessary to kill 8 innocent people. It's absolutely disgusting. I think it also prompts a lot of questions and controversy on the gun control laws in America, which is pretty much the reason why these people are dead and their families are grieving. My heart goes out to these families so much because it could have been one of my relatives. If you guys don't know, I am half Chinese and half Vietnamese and I live in Australia. I was born and raised in Sydney, and even though that attack didn't happen in Australia, it hits very close to home because racism against Asians and racism in general is not isolated just to America. It's very prevalent in Australia. I know that I personally, my friends and family have also experienced increased racism against us because we're Asian. I did make a video last year about racism against Asians during the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise of it, but it's just gotten worse and worse, and I do understand that COVID-19 opens up avenues for people to want to blame a group for the restrictions in place and the suffering and the death, but it is no one's fault. Even though the virus did originate in China, they did not purposely release this virus to intentionally harm everyone. So I think the blame needs to stop. The scapegoating of minorities needs to stop. It's happened all throughout history, not just to Asians, but to many ethnic minorities, the Jewish, Middle Eastern people. After the 9/11 attacks, as a community of ethnic minorities, we need to stand together to fight this racism and discrimination, because without the support of each other, we will never achieve equality, we will never achieve justice, and there has been so much throughout history that has led us to divide ourselves, because we would be such a powerhouse if we were to unite. I don't even know how to really word any of this video because I'm still so horrified, and last night I was just scrolling through social media and watching different videos and reading different articles on all of the hate crimes against Asians, and every single new piece of media I consumed, I was getting increasingly more angry, frustrated, and just so upset. Even though there has been a recent rise in hate against Asians because of COVID-19, this has been happening for years. It wouldn't be as prevalent as it is today if not for the years of systemic racism against Asians that we are happy to just ignore and not cause a fuss, which is a major thing in our culture, to just let it slide and not confront it because we don't want to draw more attention to ourselves. A lot of the times we don't feel like we have a voice, and that's why I want to make this video, so that one, I can get my voice out there, and two, so that I can show other Asians that they also have a voice and they should use their voice if they want to in order to spread the message. Because of the attacks that we've seen, it's only those that are reported and documented that we've seen, and there's probably thousands and thousands of more that people have been too afraid to speak up against. I do want to say that in America, particularly the former president has definitely influenced and normalized racism and racial slurs against Asians by calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, the Kung flu, and that kind of wording, although it may not seem harmful on the surface, when it is normalized by such a prominent figure of American society and therefore society on a global scale because of America's power in the global world, it normalizes that kind of behavior towards Asians. And I mean, racism has always been normalized towards Asians. Throughout history, we've been called chinks, ching chongs, and teased about our eyes being smaller. We've always been asked, where do you come from? Where do you actually come from? What language do you speak? I know I personally have had those questions so many times. I've always answered genuinely. I've said I'm born and raised in Sydney, Australia, but my parents and my ethnic background is Vietnamese and Chinese. I'm not afraid to voice my culture, but I also don't want to erase my identity here in Australia, in a westernized country, because that's all I've ever known. I was born, raised here, and my parents have now been in Australia for more years than they've been in their home countries. And I don't think that one thing is more Australian than the other. We're all Australian. Australian looks different for everyone. There's so many cultural backgrounds in this country, and I think that's the beauty of this country, is that we are a melting pot of so many ethnicities. It's not just white, it's also the indigenous population, the Asian population, the Middle Eastern population, everything. And also when I say Asian, I don't only mean East Asian, I also mean Southeast Asian. That's also another topic that has been quite controversial recently, is Southeast Asian don't get as much exposure as East Asian because there's this view of Asian only being one thing. I don't want to speak too much about that because I personally fit into the stereotype of being almost white passing as an East Asian looking person, and I never had to really deal with that kind of discrimination, I guess. But I do know that because I am also half Vietnamese, a lot of Vietnamese people do experience that if they aren't lighter skinned. And there is also just in Asia a skin color discrimination where lighter skins are more preferable than darker skins, and that's been prevalent all throughout Asian history, which is another thing that we need to work on. We're definitely not an unflawed race, I'm not trying to say that. There are also a lot of biases within myself because growing up we all feel this subconscious need to fit into white Australia. Definitely I was a lot more conscious on the way that I talk to ensure that I didn't have an accent when I talked. I try to speak as eloquently as possible. I try to speak like a white person. I have this feeling that I'm glad that I don't have an accent when I talk, which is really sad for me to think about because I shouldn't be afraid of my cultural background, but in a world where whiteness is so important in success, it's really difficult to get rid of those feelings. The reason why Asians for the most part, have been very quiet on the racism they experience is because we're viewed through the model minority myth. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a bunch of positive stereotypes about Asian people, that we're hardworking, we're well educated, and we're successful. This causes a lot of individual issues for us personally, where we feel like we always have to succeed. That's why we always have to get great marks at school. I know I definitely felt that pressure in school. I felt like I wasn't good at maths and therefore I had no self-worth. I still do not have very much confidence with maths. It can negatively impact our mental health when we don't succeed, because we place so much of our self-worth onto academic and success just in general. Of course, this does come a lot from many people from immigrant backgrounds where we came from nothing. We most likely were refugees who were fleeing our home countries because of persecution, because we were going to either be killed, tortured in our home countries, and we had to leave. We didn't have another choice. We also have this weird identity crisis where in our home countries we don't quite fit in, and here in a westernized country we also don't quite fit in. However, this view of Asians being good, I guess, in quotation marks, is used to shame other minorities for not being as successful as Asians. They'll say, you know, if the Asians can do it and succeed, why can't you? Which in America is very directed towards black people who obviously have underwent so much suffering and systemic racism and discrimination over the years and throughout American history, and we're kind of used as a tool to be like, why aren't you good enough? Which is damaging for both Asians and other minorities, but also creates a rift between ethnic minorities, which is designed to keep us apart. Now, there has always been racism against Asians, obviously, in America. I'll link some videos and some resources down below that you can check out if you would like to learn more about that, but I do want to discuss Australia since I don't want to exclude us from the conversation, and I also want to show that there has definitely been very harsh racism in Australia against Asians and all ethnic minorities. Essentially, Asians or Chinese people in particular started to migrate to Australia during the gold rush. Now, many of these were Cantonese people from the south of China, and they came here in the hopes of finding gold and getting rich. They came from a lot of poor backgrounds, a lot of farmers, and a lot of them were Asian men. My great-grandfather did come to Australia during the gold rush, and I can't even imagine what kind of racism he would experience here. And now I am here 2 generations later in the country that he was at. Asians and Chinese people were seen as no better than Indigenous people. We were seen as stealing white people's jobs. We were seen as dirty. We were seen as into gambling, addicted to opium, in opium dens. It was not a positive view of Asians, which was expected. We are the other. There was also a whole issue of only Asian men coming, and therefore there was this threat that Chinese men were going to take white women, which also prompted the Australian government to encourage other Asians, such as Japanese women, to come in as prostitutes so that the Asian men couldn't steal white women. There was also the White Australia policy in 1901, which was essentially a policy that wanted to maintain white Australia and not let any people from foreign countries, including China and Asia, to immigrate here. I also wanted to discuss the issue of Asian women in particular being fetishized by Hollywood and mainstream media, which is extremely damaging towards Asian women, which are the majority of people that have been attacked We are seen as objects, we're not seen as human, and therefore if we are objects, we can just be abused, spat on, called racial slurs. A lot of elderly are also being attacked, which I find absolutely horrible. I can't believe that people have even the thought of harming someone that is so vulnerable. In Asian culture, older people are held to the highest regard with the utmost respect. We cater to all their needs, and to think that some people are punching them in the face, stabbing them in the back is horrible. I think there is a lot of support for Asian food, K-pop, K-beauty, anime, but if you really wanted to support us, you'd actually ask if we're okay, stand up against the racism and discrimination that we face, because we are sick of putting our head down and being quiet. Staying silent is not the solution. I think that we really need to band together as a whole and fight this together. I'll leave some links of information that you can access on the history of racism, the fetishization of Asian women and the problems that come along with it, some links to donate and some links to support Asian communities, because this is definitely not just an American issue, it's a worldwide issue and it needs to stop.